Hello, everyone. I am Kathy Lewis, the founder of Capstone Institute, and I will be your instructor for this video training program on FHA direct endorsement underwriting. So let me pull up the PowerPoint and we will get started. No, that's not what I wanted to do. Let's pull it up from here. Share screen. Okay, there we go. And let's start at the beginning. And we will be ready to go. Okay. Training for FHA direct endorsement underwriters. Before we begin, I want to make sure that each of you has received the materials for this training class. You should have received the FHA direct endorsement underwriter's survival handbook, a case study on underwriting the appraisal, one on underwriting the credit, performing a technical review, a refinance case study, and a package of forms and checklists. And please feel free to duplicate and use these forms for your business. You may want to just save them to a PDF file, and then you can actually go through and do check marks on them. And another thing that I would ask you to help me with, the appraisal and the case study for the borrowers that I use for this class are real appraisals and real case studies. It's very difficult to get anybody to agree to give me one of their appraisals or one of their borrower files. They're so worried about me not changing the names or something. So what this means is that each year when I update all of the materials, I go through the case studies looking for anything that has an old date on it and update it to the current year. Just do me a favor. I don't have my proofreader like I used to have. If you find anything in the case studies where I forgot to update the date, we're now in 2024, please shoot me an email. It's Kathy, Kathyl, at capinst.com. Capinst, like Capstone Institute. Okay, so let's get started. If you wish to receive a certificate of completion, you can't miss more than 1 hour of this 12-hour webinar. You must pass a multiple choice test and need to score at least 90%. Why? Because it's an open book test. There's no timeline on completing the test. And I do believe that I scheduled the questions in the order they are in your manual. Say, thank you, Kathy. So take your time when you take the test. You should score 100. Now, understand this class is not FHA Basics 101. This course is designed to help the individual who is going to be the designated DE underwriter perform your job effectively. This means you should already have a good working knowledge of FHA guidelines, or you can take my class, Understanding FHA Loans. There are numerous handbooks and manuals designed to assist you in underwriting FHA loans. Now, the Handbook 4000.1 has incorporated a lot of these manuals, but there are still a couple that you may want to refer, and they're in the back of your table of contents. Or you can go to HUD.gov, HUD Clips, and download the manuals. Let's talk about guidelines for becoming an FHA direct endorsement underwriter. Now, if a lender wishes to become an approved DE lender, the HUD Handbook 4000.1 provides complete guidelines. Now, this underwriter's survival handbook is not designed to guide lenders through the approval process. This manual is designed to assist individuals who become the lender's direct endorsement underwriter. Part of the lender's application for DE approval involves the nomination of the individual or individuals who will serve as the lender's underwriter. And that includes a verification by the president or VP or other authorized corporate officer that the nominee has the authority to bind the corporation and has been found to meet the qualifications to underwrite FHA insured loans. You must be registered with FHA through the FHA connection once you become a DE approved underwriter, but it is the lender who takes full responsibility for the performance of the individual being nominated. You guys are lucky. When I became a DE underwriter back in the Stone Age, I had to go to the local HUD office. I had to sit through a training program, pass a test, and then become an underwriter. But I'm going to tell you the truth. I knew FHA in and out, especially property issues, because I worked for a major home builder for years. And then I was a loan officer, mostly doing origination of FHA loans, FHA or VA. And if I hadn't known FHA, I would have been in serious trouble when I took that seminar, because it didn't teach me anything. And back then, you had 20 different manuals that you had to refer to for every little thing. Today, you've got the 4000.1, which has incorporated most of these manuals. But it was tough going there for a while. You do not have to attend this training program. You simply don't get report cards. You simply have to underwrite the file. And if you sign off on it, you want to hope that when it goes down to HUD for insurance, that they review your file and accept that it is okay and insure the FHA loan. That is the ultimate goal. FHA will continue to perform an audit process on about 10% of the DE lender's closed files. If a pattern of poor underwriting is determined, FHA will notify the lender, and the lender will be expected to improve the quality of the underwriting. Once a lender registers an individual through the FHA connection and provides proof the individual has met the necessary qualifications to underwrite FHA insured mortgages, you will be assigned a CHUMS ID number. This number will remain with you wherever you go to work, just like a loan originator who gets an ID number. If they go to another lender, they still keep the same ID number. If the individual changes jobs, the former DE lender must remove the individual as its company DE underwriter through CHUMS or the FHA connection, and the new DE approved lender with whom the DE underwriter becomes employed must register you as their DE underwriter using the CHUMS ID number previously assigned to you. It's not necessary to have the same individual underwrite both the borrower and the collateral. While each underwriter must separately identify that portion of the mortgage app he or she underwrites, only the underwriter ID number shown on the FHA underwriting and transmittal summary will be recorded in CHUMS. Qualifications for becoming a DE underwriter. You can refer to HUD Handbook 4000.1, Application and Eligibility Requirements for Approval, and this outlines the qualifications required to be approved as a DE underwriter. The underwriter must be a full-time employee of the lender and must be a corporate officer with signatory authority or otherwise authorized to bind the mortgage lender in matters involving origination of mortgage loans and be employed by only one lender. So you cannot do contract underwriting for FHA loans. Experience. The underwriter must have a minimum of 3 years full-time recent experience or equivalent, one of which is the certificate of completion from this particular course, which HUD recognizes. I train all the HUD people. And once you are nominated and your company submits your resume, be sure to include the capstone certificate of completion, because that'll go a long way toward getting your DE approval. This would also include originating or servicing single family or multifamily mortgages, investing funds in real estate mortgages, or managing other individuals performing these services. The mortgagee must designate the officer in charge to be the FHA DE underwriter and submit a current resume covering the most recent 7-year period, detailing the individual's relevant experience in reviewing both credit apps and property appraisals. Experience related solely to mortgage credit or appraisal review will count for 1/2 of the total requirement. This experience should have been with an institutional investor originating for its own portfolio or purchasing these types of mortgage loans, or with an originator selling these types of mortgage loans to investors. Now, your resume must give detailed descriptions of job experiences that demonstrate knowledge of the principles, practices, and techniques of mortgage underwriter. And this will include real estate appraisal, mortgage credit evaluation, factors affecting property values and real estate trends. You must be checked through Credit Alert Interactive Voice Response System, and what they call the LDP GSA list. Will be going through all of this. Also, you may not be delinquent on any federal debt. They're going to pull your credit report. Now, the lender is responsible for ensuring the DE underwriter's familiarity with the following HUD books, many of which have been superseded by the HUD Handbook 4000.1. So you've got your 4000.1, which is your Bible. You've got the 4155, that is the old lender's guide, but chapters 10 and 11 and the old 4155 are still relevant. The appraisal procedure discussed in valuation handbooks, most of which are superseded by 4000.1, so you can review all of these. In addition, you need to keep up with all FHA mortgagee letters that affect the underwriting of the property and the credit. Make it a habit at least once or twice a week to just Google FHA mortgagee letters and see if new additional mortgagee letters have been added. Let's talk about your responsibility. Now, HUD looks to the FHA DE underwriter or officer in charge designated to manage and direct the mortgagee's FHA operations as the focal point of the DE program. Now, you must assume the following responsibilities: compliance with HUD instructions, the coordination of all phases of underwriting, and the quality of decisions made under the program, review of appraisal reports, compliance inspections if the repairs need to be done or if a new construction house has not been finished yet, credit analysis performed by fee and staff personnel to ensure responsible conclusions, sound reports, and compliance with HUD requirements. Decisions relating to the acceptability of the appraisal, the inspections, the buyer's capacity to repay the mortgage, and the overall acceptability of the mortgage loan for HUD insurance, the monitoring and evaluation of the performance of fee and staff personnel used for the DE program. Now, these underwriting responsibilities are to be performed with due diligence in a prudent manner. Got that, guys? Underwriting procedures. The FHA DE underwriter's role and responsibility are critical elements of the DE program. You're the one who will execute the underwriter certification, which enables HUD to endorse the mortgage loan without a detailed technical underwriting review. You certify that you have personally reviewed the application documents and you find they are in compliance with the applicable requirements. One of your responsibilities is the coordination of all phases of the underwriting of the mortgage. This role enables you to ensure that prudent underwriting procedures are followed. Now, included right after the table of contents section, as I mentioned earlier, you have a listing of those reference manuals that I talked about. You can Google the handbook number and title, and you can either download the manual or bookmark it as a favorite for easy access. You can also bookmark HUD mortgagee letters as a favorite. Now, you need to visit this website at least once a week to keep up with changes in FHA guidelines. Quality control plan. To qualify for basic HUD approval, a lender must implement a written quality control plan, which ensures compliance with the rules, regulations, and other HUD requirements. Now, you should be familiar with your company's quality control plan and work with the lender to implement procedures that guarantee it is being maintained. Conditional approval. Review of 15 cases. Once a lender becomes direct endorsement approved and the nominated DE underwriter is accepted, the first 15 cases underwritten require review by the local HUD office. If acceptable underwriting is demonstrated with submissions, unconditional approval may be granted. If 15 cases do not demonstrate acceptable performance, or should the first 15 cases not represent expected underwriting situations, the review may be extended for additional cases. When I was teaching this class as a live course, there were 2 young ladies in the class from South Georgia, and they were giggling when I got to this particular slide, and I said, "What's so funny?" Well, they were embarrassed to admit it, but apparently they had submitted, are you ready for this? They had submitted 37 case studies, 37 loans that they underwrote for FHA review. And HUD finally told them, look, we're not going to look at another case study until you go take this course. So the goal is to present the first 15 case studies absolutely perfect. I had a guy out in Texas whose bank went into the DE approval process and he became the designated underwriter. And of course, he was kind of freaking out. He thought he knew FHA guidelines, but geez, 15 case studies, he was a nervous wreck. And he went through the Denver Homeownership Center. Well, he sent me an email telling me that the Denver Homeownership Center called to congratulate him on what a wonderful job he did with these 15 case studies. They did not change a single thing. So the materials that we are providing for you in this class are going to make sure that if you are going to work for a company that is just now getting their DE approval, and you're the one requiring to submit these 15 test cases, you're going to do a great job. Now, I want you to understand one thing. This is probably the biggest #1 question I get from individuals who want to become a DE underwriter. They ask me about the 15 test cases and if they personally must submit 15 test cases to HUD to get their DE approval. And the answer is no. The pre-closing review requirement is applied to the lender, not the DE underwriter. Once a lender has successfully completed the pre-closing review stage in one HUD office, subsequent field offices should accept the approval, and they should call and verify the lender is performing acceptably with at least one field office that has granted unconditional approval. Now, your streamlined refinances do not count toward the 15 case requirement, although to tell you the truth, they call them a streamline, but we're going to do a streamline case study in this class because of all the refis. This is the most convoluted and confusing of all the refis. So they should make it one of the 15 test cases. A lot to remember. Unconditional approval. Upon satisfactory completion of the pre-closing case review period, the lender receives unconditional approval and will receive a letter from HUD to that effect. Now, when an unconditionally approved DE lender adds a new underwriter to an existing underwriting staff, you don't have to go through any pre-closing review. The existing underwriters are going to be responsible for making sure the new one does acceptable work. You do have to meet the same basic eligibility requirements. Now, what if a DE lender loses all of its underwriters? You know what, guys? It automatically loses DE approval and therefore will be required to go through the 15-case pre-closing review upon hiring an acceptable underwriter. So they're going to nominate this new underwriter through CHUMS or the FHA connection. And this new DE underwriter who was conditionally approved with another lender. Honey, you still have to do the 15-case pre-closing review. Why? Because it's the lender who lost their DE approval when they lost their underwriter. So you may have been a DE underwriter for 30 years, but you go to work for a company who lost its DE approval. Now that company must submit the 15 test cases. Now, that's not to say if the company hires a DE underwriter, they don't require you to go through some test cases to show them that you know what you're doing, but you don't have to submit 15 to HUD. To sum it up, the role of the DE underwriter involves tremendous responsibility. That's why you make the big bucks, right, guys? You are expected to have a thorough knowledge of the following. Underwriting the FHA property. You must be familiar with FHA requirements for approval of condos, special FHA programs such as construction perm, manufactured housing, energy efficient mortgages, the 203K. We're going to be going through all of these. You need to know how to handle repair requirements listed on the appraisal for existing properties and when repair requirements may be waived. We'll be going through that. New construction properties require a thorough knowledge of requirements for builders who wish to offer FHA financing, as well as guidelines for new construction properties. We'll be going through this. And of course, you must be able to thoroughly review and underwrite the FHA appraisal. Underwriting the credit. You must have a thorough knowledge of FHA credit underwriting guidelines. This includes eligible borrowers, acceptable sources of income and assets, how FHA views bankruptcies, foreclosures, collection accounts, judgments, and derogatory credit issues. You must have a thorough knowledge of FHA guidelines for refinance transactions. Fraud detection and prevention should be an integral part of the underwriting process. You must also be familiar with the required FHA documentation. Now, this includes required FHA disclosures and forms that must be signed by you. So that covers what it will take to become a DE underwriter. And now, if you will turn to the second section of your manual, Underwriting the FHA Property, let me explain to you why the property guidelines are in the beginning of the manual. And I'll tell you. With FHA, credit is credit. Let's face it, guys. You know, you've got different qualifying ratios. They're more lenient on some of the issues with bankruptcies and foreclosures. But the biggest difference between an FHA loan and a conventional loan is the property. They have a lot of little nitpicking guidelines that you are responsible to be familiar with. For that reason, I cover the property first. So by the time we get to the credit, man, it's going to be a breeze. So let's talk about underwriting the FHA property. Handling property considerations. In addition to thoroughly reviewing and underwriting the appraisal, You need to be familiar with all aspects of FHA property considerations, including repair and inspection requirements for existing properties. When will repairs be required? Site considerations. While the old valuation condition sheet, what we call the VC sheet, has been eliminated, there are still issues regarding the site that need to be addressed. Well and septic tank considerations. When is an inspection required? When will hookup to public water and sewer be required? I just got an email from a company. The underwriter was concerned because she was underwriting a file where there was a shared well. And she wanted to make sure that all requirements were met. And if you go to the HUD 4000.1, there's a list this long of everything that must be in a shared well document, agreement. Very important. I mean, how would you like to buy a house with a well on it that you share with your neighbor and they get mad at you and they block your access? So you want to make sure that there's a good shared well agreement. Required FHA disclosures and forms relating to the property. What disclosures are required to be signed by the borrowers or other parties to the transaction? What forms relating to the property must be completed and signed by the DE underwriter? Special considerations. That includes property flipping and the requirement for a second appraisal. A thorough review and underwriting of the appraisal, and we're going to be going through that. FHA new construction requirements, which we will address. All of these we're going to be addressing in detail. So let's talk about repair inspection requirements for existing properties. You guys have no idea how easy you have it. Back when I was originating, you couldn't get a seller to agree to sell their house with the borrowers using FHA financing because the repair requirements were absolutely absurd. But today, they have pretty much gotten in line with conventional requirements for existing properties. They require only repairs for those property conditions that rise above the level of cosmetic defects, minor defects, or normal wear and tear. So you'll need to use professional judgment and prudent underwriting practices in determining when repairs will be required. FHA now permits an as-is appraisal for existing properties when minor property deficiencies don't affect the safety of the occupants or the security and soundness of the property. FHA no longer requires repairs for minor cosmetic deficiencies to bring a property into compliance with FHA minimum property requirements. Now, if you look in your book, there is a list of minor property conditions that no longer require automatic repair for existing property. Now, some examples of conditions that continue to require automatic repair. Here is a list, but they're not limited. Inadequate access or egress from bedrooms to the exterior of the home. Leaking or worn out roof. If 3 or more layers of shingles on an existing or worn out roof, all existing shingles must be removed before re-roofing. Evidence of structural problems, such as foundation damage caused by excessive settlement. Defective paint surfaces in homes constructed pre-1978. Defective exterior paint surfaces in homes constructed after 1978, where the finish is otherwise unprotected. You must review the appraisal to determine whether the appraiser has reported any property conditions that will affect the health and safety of the occupants or the security and soundness of the property, and you must require immediate repair where the property condition poses a threat to these criteria. FHA no longer mandates automatic inspections for the following items or conditions for existing properties. Wood destroying insects. Inspections are required only if there is evidence of active infestation, could be mandated by the state or local jurisdiction. I think Louisiana is number 1 in termites. Florida is probably number 2. Georgia, I think, is number 3. So find out from your particular state whether or not this is going to be required. FHA no longer mandates termite inspections for any structure that is ground level and for any structure where wood touches the ground. You know what we used to have to do with these houses? We used to have to get a contractor out there when the wood was touching the ground. They had to dig a trench all the way around the house, which to me is just crazy. Inspections for a flat and or unobservable roof, no longer required. Examples of conditions that will continue to require automatic inspections include, but are not limited to, standing water against the foundation and or excessively damp basements, hazardous materials on the site or within the improvements, faulty or defective mechanical systems. That includes electrical, plumbing, or heating. Evidence of possible structural failure like settlement or bulging foundations. I've seen all of these. Non-residential use. The non-residential portion of the total floor area may now go up to 49%. It used to be 25%. Any non-residential use must be subordinate to its residential use, character, and appearance, may not impair the residential character or marketability of the property. It must be legally permitted and must conform to current zoning requirements. Site considerations. Now, here are a few frequently asked questions. We won't go through every one of them, but they're here. So I'll show you where you can go for the additional ones. Site hazards and nuisances. The subject property has an underground stationary storage tank. What should I do? I used to do a lot of training up in New York, and they had a lot of these, especially in upstate New York. This question came up over and over. Answer: FHA guidelines state that the appraiser must notify the lender of any deficiency in minimum property standards of, if the subject property line is located, ready for this, within 300 feet of an above ground or subsurface stationary storage tank with a capacity of 1,000 gallons or more of flammable or explosive material. Now, this includes domestic and commercial uses, as well as automotive service station tanks. The appraiser should note any readily observable surface evidence of leakage or on-site soil contamination. Now, you don't need to remove the tank if it has all explosive materials removed from it. But you know what I would do, guys? I would require that the tank be washed out. Because I know kids, I can just hear some kids now sneaking up on this tank and taking a little, hey guys, let's drop a match down here and let's see what happens. So if you do run into this, make it a requirement for them to wash out the inside of that storage tank. And you need to have the borrower sign a statement that they accept the condition and hold the lender harmless should problems occur. Boy, these hold harmless letters with, America is the most litigious nation on the planet, and you need to protect yourself. Question: what if a property is located within 300 feet of a gas station? Answer: the property would be ineligible if it is located within 300 feet of an above ground or subsurface stationary storage tank with the capacity of 1,000 gallons or more of flammable or explosive material. Now, we're talking about one that is still in use. This includes domestic and commercial uses, as well as automotive service station tanks. What if the property is located near high-pressure gas lines? The appraiser must identify if the dwelling or related property improvements are near high-pressure gas or liquid petroleum pipelines or other volatile and explosive products, both above ground and subsurface. The appraiser must determine and report the marketability of the property based on this analysis and notify the lender of any deficiency of minimum property standards. If the property, is not located more than 10 feet from the nearest boundary of the pipeline easement. Question: what if the property is located in the fall zone, tower height of high voltage transmission lines? I get a lot of these questions in Tennessee because they have a lot of these high voltage transmission lines in that area. The answer is the appraiser must notify the lender of the deficiency of minimum property standards if the overhead electrical power transmission lines or local distribution lines pass directly over the dwelling, structure, or related property improvement, including pools, spas, or water features. The appraiser must notify the lender of the deficiency of minimum property standards if the dwelling or related property improvements are located within an easement or if they appear to be located within unsafe distance of any power line or tower. If the living unit is located outside the easement, then the property is eligible. In other words, it can go over the garage as long as there's no living area above the garage. But otherwise, it's okay. The appraiser must note and comment on the effect of marketability resulting from the proximity to such high site hazards and nuisances and determine if the guidelines for encroachments apply. Soil contamination. I got an email from an underwriter in upstate New York. She was confused. She had a loan app, and the house had 7 garages that were being used for automobile mechanics. Well, of course, your issue is soil contamination. So I told her to get a soil test to determine whether or not there is soil contamination. If no soil contamination is evident, and if there are no marketability issues or zoning violations, then the property should be acceptable. So check for zoning. And of course, think about how it will affect marketability in the future. And now you're going to be looking carefully at the borrowers to make sure they don't default at some point in time. What if a dwelling is near a high pressure gas line or liquid petroleum pipeline? This is acceptable if it's located at least 10 feet from the nearest boundary of the pipeline easement. The appraiser needs to check for soil contamination and comment on the effect of marketability. Private road access and maintenance. Question: what documentation should we require for a private road? Answer: you will need evidence that the road is protected by a permanent recorded easement. A title search should reveal this, and it is your responsibility to determine if the title policy shows sufficient evidence of a permanent recorded easement. It must be reviewed and approved by the DE underwriter and documented in your lender file. Determine if the road is maintained by a homeowners association and obtain a copy of the maintenance agreement. If not, there's no longer a requirement for a maintenance agreement, but The appraiser should comment on the condition of the road and address marketability. So you want the appraiser to give you several photos of the road to determine it is being well maintained. Question: how do you handle a situation with a shared driveway? Same thing, like the shared well. There must be a recorded easement. Mechanical systems. Question: must central AC and inside appliances be working? Well, yeah. Any items contributing to the value must be operational. Question: must the residents have a permanent heat source? Yep. The heat source must automatically heat the living areas of the house to a minimum of 50 degrees Fahrenheit. Remaining life of the roof. I get this question all the time. What is the permissible minimum remaining life of a roof before it must be replaced? And what should the DE underwriter require in this situation? If the roof has less than 2 years of remaining life, require an inspection by a professional roofer to determine whether it must be replaced. Other health and safety deficiencies. Question: are smoke detectors required? Answer: only on 203K rehab properties. Question: when is a handrail necessary? It is necessary if it poses a safety issue for occupants. Then it's going to be required. Well, I needed a little clarification on that. So this is what I would recommend. This is what they told me. Typically, if there are only 1 or 2 steps, a handrail is not required. If there are 3 or more steps, a handrail is required. So you want the appraiser to provide photos of the steps to determine if there's more than 2 steps. Question: if an older garage door opener doesn't have the automatic reverse feature and/or doesn't stop when met with resistance, yikes, must a new opener be installed? Nope. FHA no longer requires repair of a garage door opener, but the appraiser should be mindful that local requirements may require repair. If the appraisal reveals that security bars were found on bedroom windows, must they be removed to comply with local fire codes? I ran into this a lot when I did training in New York. The answer: security bars are acceptable if they comply with local fire codes. Occupants of a bedroom must be able to get outside the home if there is a fire. Question: because of the concern with lead-based paint used on homes built prior to 1978, must chipping paint on a home built before 78 be cured? Yep. What if the home was built after 78? Nope. They didn't use that lead-based paint after 78. It was banned. Question: who can perform repairs when the appraiser noted defective paint in a home built prior to 78 in view of EPA's new lead-based paint renovation, repair, and remodeling rule? Well, this happened back in 2010. The EPA changed its requirements, and painting for houses built prior to 78, homeowners performing renovation, repair, or painting work on their own home are exempt from the rule, but are encouraged to learn to perform lead-safe work practices. Property owners or landlords who renovate, repair, or prepare surfaces for painting in pre-78 rental housing must be certified and follow lead-safe work practices required by the rule. Contractors who perform the repair must be certified and must follow specific work practices to prevent lead contamination. Question: when is a driveway slope considered to be excessive? Well, if it exceeds the prescribed steepness, but the appraiser states that the driveway does appear to be safe, the property is acceptable. I worked for a home builder many years ago. Mostly we did FHA and VA loans, And some of the driveways were incredibly steep. So you know what they did? They would sell it to a veteran. They had a house with a driveway that was really steep. They'd sell it to a veteran who would sign an agreement that says, I realize that the house I'm buying has a driveway so steep that when I drive my car up, it falls over backwards. I accept this condition and waive the builder of any responsibility. Manufactured housing. You may wish to review these questions relating to manufactured housing if your office handles them. Some do. A lot of companies down in Florida do manufactured housing. Miscellaneous questions. What specific items can be addressed or altered by the DE underwriter, if any? Answer. DE underwriters are permitted to waive cosmetic repairs, which have basically been eliminated today. Repairs that affect the safety of the borrowers may not be waived. DE underwriters may require any additional repairs deemed necessary to protect the safety of the borrowers or to ensure marketability of the property. And you should document the reason for overriding a repair or an inspection that the appraisal is conditioned upon. As long as it doesn't affect livability, you can waive it. Does the appraiser or underwriter determine what type of certification or work needs to be completed on items noted by an appraiser? Well, potential repair and condition items are noted by the appraiser, but the lender must make the final determination as to how the potential repairs and conditions are satisfied. Question. Can an appraiser do a compliance inspection? Yes, if it's within the appraiser's scope. You know, in the old days, the appraiser had to be an FHA approved inspector. But today, they allow the local authority with jurisdiction over the property, excuse me, to do an inspection. Hold on. Let me get a drink of water here, guys. Okay. So today, the local authority with jurisdiction of the property or an ICC certified RCI or CI is acceptable. I don't even know what that means. Please note, FHA has updated their guidelines regarding inspections for new construction or repairs. FHA inspectors have been replaced. Inspection of structural repairs must be performed like what we just said before, the local authority with jurisdiction over the property or an ICC certified RCI or CI. And I told you, I don't know what ICC or RCI mean. I have no idea. May the lender ever do the repair inspections? Well, the lender may do compliance inspection as long as the person making the inspection is qualified to clear the item. I would be careful on that if I were you. You know, some underwriters have permitted the loan originator to go out to go out and make an inspection, but they want the loan closed so they can get their commission. I would be really, really careful about letting just anybody from your office make that inspection. If it's a minor thing, like putting up a handrail because the steps have 3 steps instead of 2, then the person can take a photo. And as long as the photo you see is acceptable, let it go. Please describe some repair items that would qualify for an escrow holdback. Well, there are a couple here. You have exterior paint in cold weather and landscaping when weather doesn't permit. If it affects the livability of the property, you cannot escrow for those items to be completed. They must be completed before the borrowers move into the property. So we're looking at exterior items that won't affect their livability. FHA requirements for individual wells and septic tanks. Well water testing or inspection will only be required if it's mandated by state or local jurisdiction, knowledge the well water may be contaminated, or relies on a water purification system due to the presence of contaminants, or where there is evidence of corrosion of the pipes, plumbing, areas of intensive agriculture within a quarter mile, coal mining or gas drilling operations within a quarter mile, a dump, junkyard, landfill, factory, gas station, or dry cleaning operation within a quarter mile. Unusually objectionable taste, smell, or appearance of well water that requires well water testing. So that is superseding an old mortgagee letter. Septic tank inspections will only be required if there is evidence of system failure, if mandated by a state or local jurisdiction, if it is customary to the area or at the lender's discretion. And I tell you the truth, I cannot imagine buying a house on septic tank without getting an inspection by the current owners of the property. There are just too many things that I saw over the years that septic tanks were messed up. And of course, the buyers don't want to spend money. The sellers don't want to spend money. So they agree, well, we never had any trouble with the septic tank. And then the buyers move in and they have all sorts of problems. But that's up to them. It is not mandated by FHA. Minimum distance requirements between private wells and septic tanks. Well, FHA requires a domestic well be located a minimum of 50 feet from a septic tank. Let's hope it's uphill. 100 feet from the septic tank drain field, and 10 feet from any property line. Should state or local regulations require a greater distance, those distances must be met. I got an email from a student, from a DE underwriter who had taken this course. She was underwriting a file, and the appraiser said that he could not determine where the drain field was. And she didn't know what to do. And I said, well, I used to work for a home builder, and it was my job to go to the county and get building permits, water meters, and sewer taps. If we built a house on a property requiring a septic tank, I had to go to the county and fill out the request and then leave, because the county would send out one of their inspectors to look at the property, and the inspector would determine the location of the septic tank and the septic tank drain field. And they would come back with a map. You've got a plot plan of the property with the dimensions and everything. And they would draw on this plot plan exactly where the location of the septic tank should be and the drain field. So I suggested that she go to the local county and ask for a copy of that plot plan, which she did, and she was able to determine where the septic tank drain field was located. If locality permits less distance requirements, submit evidence in the case binders in compliance with applicable local or state requirements. Waivers from homeownership centers no longer necessary to be properties meeting these distance requirements. Domestic well from septic tank drain field. State or local requirements are okay if it's not less than 75 feet separation. Domestic well from property line. State local requirements okay if well is not within 10 feet of roadway or property line other than single family. Well cannot be within 10 feet of commercial, industrial, or multifamily. On-site well and septic inspections. State licensed engineers may now be used for such inspections, which are performed for FHA insurance purposes. And then you can review the rest of this material outlined in your book. Make sure the engineer meets all criteria. And by the way, if the borrower is paying these inspection fees, they may be financed into the loan. if the appraisal supports it. I'll be showing you how to do that later. Determining the availability of public water or sewer. This is one thing we don't like about FHA. The lender must determine the availability of public water or sewer, and if it is available, the property is going to have to be hooked up. Hookup may be waived if the cost of hookup exceeds 3% of the estimated value. Now, I want you to remember something. Cost of hookup includes the cost of the water meter or the cost of the sewer tap, as well as the plumber's cost to run the line from the street to the house. See, a lot of times I've seen underwriters require the plumber's estimate, but they forget about the water meter or the sewer tap. And I'm going to tell you something. I have talked to a lot of my students in different states who tell me, you know what I used to pay when I had to go work for that builder and I'd get the water meters and the sewer taps? The water meters would run an average of $300, $300 to $500, sewer taps $250 to $300, depending on the county. You know what they are today? They're telling me they're like $5,000. So take that into consideration, guys. And if it exceeds 3% of the estimated value of the property, you can waive the requirement for hookup. Hookup is mandatory. Feasibility is also determined by the distance to the lot, not the house. So if water or sewer is available in front of the property, connection is mandatory. If the facilities are now available, you need to contact the realtor. So let the loan originator know and advise the realtor of hookup requirement. Who pays for the hookup must be determined. FHA exhibit to contract typically states who will pay, and we'll be going through that required exhibit. Proof of hookup must be obtained prior to closing. The appraiser must determine the availability of public water or sewer and so state on the appraisal. And if the appraisal states they're not available, no further documentation is required. Now, if the appraiser won't certify availability, the lender must obtain a letter from the local municipality stating whether or not it is available. One of the old holdovers for FHA requirements. Frequently asked questions regarding wells and septic tanks. Is the appraiser still required to report well, septic, and property line distances on an addendum to the appraisal, or is this only required when problems are noted? How is the lender to determine if these distance requirements are met if the appraiser is not required to identify? Answer: the appraiser is not required to sketch the distances between the well and the septic. However, they should be mindful of FHA's minimum distance requirements between the private wells and the septic systems in performance of FHA appraisals, and if discernible, comment on them. Prudent appraisal practice would have the appraiser requesting a copy of a survey from the homeowner if available. If the appraisal notes a distance issue, it could be potential for contamination. If it notes any adverse site conditions, that may warrant further inspections or due diligence. In either case, it is your decision as to whether a qualified third party should map the distances and/or require testing for compliance with local or state requirements, or in their absence, FHA requirements. And remember what I told you. If you can contact the county or municipality that issues permits for septic tanks and wells, they have a plot plan showing the location. And that sure beats paying somebody, a third party, to map the distances. Local or customary requirements should be noted within the appropriate area of the appraisal report. However, the decision to require a test, certification, or inspection, other than what is automatically required, as noted in this old mortgagee letter, is made by the lender. You need to be familiar with market areas in which they lend. Question: is it mandatory for a well septic report to show distance to lot lines? Well, there's no standardized well septic report, and its contents would typically be determined by what is requested. If a lender determines there is a need to confirm distances, then you would specifically request a qualified third party measure the distances. Or like I said, go to the local county or municipality and ask for a copy of the well or septic tank permit, because it'll show the distance. Will the DE underwriter require a septic inspection when the property is vacant? I would. Septic testing is to be governed by state or local requirements. However, the appraiser must note any readily observable deficiencies regarding the septic system and its surrounding areas. If I were you and the property has been vacant for a year or more, I would mandate a septic inspection, because a lot of stuff could have happened within that year. If there are obvious, readily observable signs of system failure, the appraiser is to require inspection to ensure that the system is in proper working order. In those instances where a subject property is vacant, FHA defers to the underwriter to employ prudent underwriting in requiring any tests or certifications based on reported property conditions, including the property vacancy. How would shared well agreements be treated? Well shared by up to 4 properties are acceptable, provided there is an acceptable legal agreement between the property owners, the quality of the water is found acceptable, there is sufficient capacity, and it is in accordance with local well codes. A shared well must have a shared well agreement. And like I said, the 4000.1 has a complete outline of everything that needs to be in that agreement. Procedures for requesting well waivers, well, they're no longer required, so we're going to skip that part. Let's go to required FHA disclosures and forms relating to the property. Now, there are several required FHA forms and disclosures relating to the property, including for your protection, get a home inspection. This must be provided to the borrowers no later than initial loan application. So the loan originator should provide it. New construction cases and refis are exempt. Some states have incorporated this form into their standard sales contract. FHA amendatory clause and real estate certification, typically included in an FHA exhibit to the sales contract, which we'll take a look at. Lead-based paint disclosure. If the property was built before 1978, the seller must disclose any information known about lead-based paint and lead-based paint hazards before selling the house in accordance with HUD EPA lead disclosure rule. The lender must ensure that the borrower has been provided the EPA-approved information pamphlet and identifying and controlling lead-based paint hazards. So it's called Protect Your Family from Lead in Your Home. I've got all of these disclosures in your book. The borrower was given a 10-day period before becoming obligated to purchase the home to conduct a lead-based paint inspection or risk assessment to determine the presence of lead-based paint or lead-based paint hazards, or waive the opportunity. The sales contract contains an attachment signed and dated by both the seller and the purchaser containing a lead warning statement, providing the seller's disclosure of the presence of any known lead-based paint or lead-based paint hazard in the house being sold, or indication of no knowledge of such presence. The purchaser should be provided with any records or repairs available to the seller pertaining to lead-based paint and or lead-based paint hazards, or indication by the seller that no such records or reports exist. and the borrower should sign a statement affirming that they received the pamphlet, disclosure, and records of or reports. When an agent is involved in the transaction on behalf of the seller, the sales contract should include a statement that the agent has informed the seller of the seller's lead disclosure rule obligations, and the agent is aware of their duty to ensure compliance with the requirements of the rule and have signed and dated the contract. Hotel and transient use certification is required for every 2, 3, or 4 family dwelling, or a single family dwelling, which is one of a group of 5 or more dwellings owned by the same borrower. This is HUD's assurance the property will not be used for hotel or transient purposes or otherwise rented for periods less than 30 minutes. Oh, I'm sorry, guys, 30 days. Just kidding. If the subject property is an eligible investor loan, you must determine if the borrower owns other rental properties and where they are located. Because investor borrowers are limited to no more than 7 rental units in the same contiguous area. That's a 2-block area. And a duplex is considered 2 units. If the investor borrower owns more than 7 rental units, you must review a map of the area to ascertain that the investor borrower is not in violation of the 7-unit limitation. Now, they can own 100 rental properties. They just can't own more than 7 within a 2-block area. That's what this is saying. Compliance inspection report. Not required for minor repairs inspected by the appraiser. Written certification is acceptable. Repairs of a structural nature must be inspected by the local authority, and you will review, and they will complete this form, and you will review and sign it, acknowledging full acceptance repairs have been completed. Mortgagee's assurance of completion form. This relates to escrowing. If adverse weather conditions prevent completion of repairs, funds in the amount of 1.5 times the appraiser's estimate of repair costs may be escrowed, and FHA will accept this form. Now, this procedure may be used only when the following conditions apply. The dwelling is livable and essentially complete. The deferred work cannot be acceptably completed prior to loan closing, but will be completed within 6 months. And guys, you need to keep up with any deferred work. One of my friends at HUD told me that you would be amazed at the number of DE lenders who forget to follow up on the repairs. And they've got all of these escrow funds that have been reserved and nobody's done anything about it. So be careful. All other conditions of the appraisal have been satisfied by compliance inspections or by an acceptable mortgagee's assurance of completion. And the lender has not been denied the privilege of using a mortgagee's assurance of completion. You know why they deny it? Because there was no follow-up or non-satisfaction of outstanding escrows. Mortgagee certification that conditions have been satisfied is acceptable in instances in which the required repair items are minor and uncomplicated, like the borrower could complete the work themselves. FHA considers that work minor. Direct endorsement underwriter, HUD review appraiser analysis of appraisal report. If you conclude that the appraisal report findings are inconsistent or are otherwise unacceptable, you may contact the appraiser or return the case to the appraiser for reconsideration. You may also add comments or corrections to modify or amend the report by using the form, and they must be supported by HUD valuation policy and adequately documented. This includes adjusting a value the removal or addition of repair requirements, and the overall determinations of property approval and rejection. Now, of course, you're not going to mark up the appraisal report in any way. That's why you use that form. Reviewing the information on the back of the conditional commitment. Well, you know what, guys? I'm going to tell you the truth. If you look at the form on page 27, 3-27, they updated this form, by the way, but I was kind of surprised that if you look on the back of the conditional commitment, they kept all of the information regarding new or proposed construction, even though the handbook is different. So I'm going to skip this information on the back of the conditional commitment, but it is in your manual. Doesn't include anything that we have not already discussed. So one thing I do want to bring up, though, is termite control existing construction, and that is one of the conditions on the back of the conditional commitment. And we discussed this over on page 3-30. A lot of problems you can run into with this. Termite control for existing construction. A recognized termite control operator shall furnish certification using the state form that the house and other structures within the legal boundaries of the property indicate no evidence of active termite infestation. Now, FHA no longer requires a termite certification unless the appraiser notes evidence of active infestation, or it could be mandated by the state. Like I said, if the property's in Louisiana or Florida or Georgia, where termites are really, really rampant, they may require it. Soil poisoning is an unacceptable method for treating termites unless the mortgagee obtains satisfactory assurance that the treatment will not endanger the quality of the water supply. In the event a termite certification is required, you need to review it carefully to determine if there is any indication of termite infestation, because numerous problems can arise with this certification. Here are some examples. The certification indicates previous infestation. This certification must show the date the property was treated for prior infestation and the expiration date. The report will probably state the termite company performing the inspection will not certify to any structural damage caused by the previous infestation. FHA states that inspection is only required if the appraisal indicates evidence of structural damage. So it's up to you to decide whether an inspection will be required. This is what I used to do. Certification indicates earth to wood contact. Now, FHA has eliminated the requirement there be at least 6 inches from the last row of siding to the ground. If the inspection doesn't indicate evidence of infestation, no final inspection needs to be performed. Certification indicates the property has a crawl space. Now, FHA has eliminated the requirement for a sheet of polyvinyl placed in the crawl space as a moisture barrier unless the appraiser indicates problems with the flooring in the house due to moisture from the crawl space. Any problems indicated on the termite certification must be handled prior to closing. You must review the report carefully and verify that all problems indicated on the report have been corrected before issuing closing instructions. Completing the conditional commitment. Let me back up for a second here. Well, let me go back. Here we go. Previous infestation. I want to make sure you understand what I was talking about. The certification must show the date the property was treated for prior infestation and the expiration date. And it will probably state the termite company performing the inspection won't certify to any structural damage caused by the previous infestation. If there is no indication of structural damage, no additional inspections need to be performed. But this is going to be your responsibility to determine whether or not you need an inspection to certify any structural damage. And if you decide not to, you need to get a hold harmless letter. The people who buy this house need to make the determination or whether or not they're going to require the sellers to do that inspection. And if you say it's not required, I don't want them coming back on you if problems arise later on. So that's just one thing I wanted to remind you of. Okay. So here we go. First to wood. Okay, so let's talk about the conditional commitment. Okay. So conditional commitment will be completed by the DE underwriter after you review the appraisal. Now, the typed-in areas are completed by the loan processor and will be provided to you with the credit underwriting package. And your signature and Chum's ID will be handwritten in addition to any other conditions you may wish to add. The life of the conditional commitment term begins. If processed under direct endorsement, the term begins on the day the appraiser signs the appraisal report. And you can refer to page 6 of the appraisal for the signature and date of the appraisal. If by some reason it's processed by HUD, maybe a HUD REO property, on the day HUD issues the conditional commitment. The validity period for all appraisals has been extended to 180 days. Used to be 120. Valid if borrower approved prior to expiration. The borrower must have been approved or a valid sales contract must have been executed prior to the expiration of the appraisal. Approval of the borrower occurs when HUD issues a firm commitment or the DE underwriter signs the FHA loan underwriting and transmittal summary. Back in 22, they had an appraisal update where the initial appraisal report will be more than 180 days at disbursement date. An appraisal update may be performed to extend the validity period, see ordering an appraisal. Where the initial appraisal is updated, the updated appraisal is valid for 1 year after the effective date of the initial appraisal report that's being updated. If you have to order an update, you can only order one if, 1, it is the mortgagee listed as an intended user of the original appraisal. 2, it has received permission from the original client and the appraiser. The appraiser incorporates the original appraisal report being updated by attachment rather than by reference per Advisory Opinion 3 of the U.S. PAP. The mortgagee may use an appraisal update only if it is performed by an FHA appraiser who is currently in good standing on the FHA appraiser roster. If a substitute appraiser is used due to the lack of original appraisal availability, the subject appraiser must state they concur with the analysis and conclusions in the original appraisal report, and you must document in the case binder why the original appraisal wasn't used. Property hasn't declined in value. Building improvements that contribute value to the property can be observed from the street or a public way. The exterior inspection of the property reveals no deficiencies or other significant changes. The appraisal update was performed by the appraiser within 1 year from the effective date of the initial appraisal being updated, and the appraisal update is performed before the disbursement date. Now, please note, a new conditional commitment does not need to be completed when an appraisal is updated. It only needs to be completed when completely new second appraisal is provided. Now, there are 3 copies of the conditional commitment. You have the lender copy, you have the home buyer's copy, and the case binder copy, all which must be signed by the DE underwriter. And the borrowers are to be provided the home buyer's copy of the conditional commitment, along with a copy of the appraisal no later than closing. Now, please note, the action date should be the date of loan approval and should coincide with the approval date on the HUD addendum, which we'll be going through. The commitment issue date, will be the date of the appraiser's inspection as found on the appraisal report. The expiration date on the conditional commitment is 180 days from the commitment issued date. That's when the appraiser signed it, and should match the expiration date on the HUD addendum. So here is the form. You've got a copy in your book. Let me put on my glasses for this. Over on the left where it says Ann Jones, this is where you will sign the conditional commitment. The action date will be the date the appraiser signed the appraisal. You've got your FHA case number and the mortgagee, whoever your mortgage company is. We have the estimated value of the property address. It is existing. Monthly expense estimate, fire insurance, and property taxes. Commitment issued January 11, 2024. Commitment expires July 9, 2024. Improved living area, 1,800 square feet. Condo, community, whatever, if they're paying a condo fee, you would show that total, $190.91. Specific commitment conditions, estimating remaining economic life of this property is 45 years, and that is on the appraisal report. The property is eligible for maximum financing. Now, we're going to be going through an appraisal. And when we get finished with the appraisal, we're going to fill out this form. So you'll be going through this a little later. Prohibition of property flipping. The handbook 4000.1 outlines the restrictions on property flipping, probably not nearly as bad as it used to be. It's indicative of a practice whereby recently acquired property is resold for a considerable profit with an artificially inflated value. Definition: property flipping refers to the purchase and subsequent resale of a property in a short period of time. Time restriction on transfers of title. The eligibility of a property for a mortgage insured by FHA is determined by the time that has elapsed between the date the seller has acquired title to the property and the date of execution of the sales contract that will result in FHA insured mortgage. FHA defines the seller's date of acquisition as the date the seller acquired legal ownership of that property. FHA defines the resale date as the date of execution of the sales contract by all parties intending to finance the property with an FHA insured mortgage. Restriction on resales occurring 90 days or fewer after acquisition. So a property that is being resold 90 days or fewer following the seller's date of acquisition is not eligible for an FHA insured mortgage. If the resale is occurring between 91 and 180 days, you must obtain a second appraisal by another appraiser. If the resale date of the property is between 91 and 180 days following acquisition by the seller, the resale price is 100% or more over the price paid by the seller to acquire the property. Used to go on all the time before the crash back in 2008. If the second appraisal supports a value of the property that is more than 5% lower than the value of the first appraisal, the lower value must be used as the property value in determining the adjusted value. The cost of the second appraisal may not be charged to the borrower. Exceptions to time restrictions on resale. Properties acquired by an employer or relocation agency in connection with the relocation of an employee. Resales by HUD under its REO program. Sales by other U.S. government agencies of single-family properties pursuant to programs operated by these agencies. Sales of properties by nonprofits approved to purchase HUD-owned single-family properties at a discount with resale restriction. Sales of properties that are acquired by the seller by inheritance. Sales of properties by state and federally chartered financial institutions and government-sponsored enterprises. Sales of property by local and state government agencies within PDMDAs only upon issuance of a notice of an exception from HUD. Now, the restrictions listed above and those in the 24 CFR, et cetera, do not apply to a builder selling a newly built house or building a house for a borrower planning to use FHA insured financing. And you must obtain a 12-month chain of title documenting compliance with time restrictions on resales. Second appraisal requirements. Now, Handbook 4000.1 states the mortgagee is prohibited from ordering an additional appraisal to achieve an increase in value for the property or elimination or reduction of deficiencies or repairs. You may order a second appraisal that are in accordance with requirements on property flipping. Second appraisal by original mortgagee. It can only be ordered if the DE underwriter determines the first appraisal is deficient. The appraiser is unable or uncooperative in resolving the deficiency. You need to fully document the deficiency and status of the appraisal in the mortgagee file, and you must pay for the second appraisal. Material deficiencies on appraisals are those deficiencies that have a direct impact on value and marketability. Material deficiencies include, but are not limited to, failure to report readily observable defects that impact the health and safety and or structural soundness of the house, reliance upon outdated or dissimilar comparable sales when more recent and or comps were available as of the effective date of the appraisal, and fraudulent statements or conclusions when the appraiser had reason to know or should have known that such statements or conclusions compromise the integrity, accuracy, and or thoroughness of the appraisal submitted to the client. Second appraisal by the second mortgagee, you can only be ordered by them under the following conditions. The first appraisal contains material deficiencies as determined by the underwriter for the second mortgagee. The appraiser performing the first appraisal is prohibited from performing appraisals for this lender. Maybe they're not on your approved list. The first mortgagee fails to provide a copy of the appraisal to the second mortgagee in a timely manner, and the failure would cause a delay in closing and harm to the borrower. That would include loss of interest rate lock, violation of the purchase contract, deadline occurrence of foreclosure proceedings, and imposition of late fees. Use of second appraisal. For the first two cases outlined above, you must rely only on the second appraisal and ensure that copies of both appraisals are retained in the case binder. For the third case above, the first appraisal must be added to the case binder if it is received. Required documentation: you must document why a second appraisal was ordered and retain the explanation in all appraisal reports in the case binder. You may order only an update if it is a mortgagee listed as an intended user of the original appraisal, or it has received permission from the original client and the appraiser. The appraiser incorporates the original report being updated by attachment rather than by reference per this opinion letter. The mortgagee may use an update of appraisal only if it is performed by the FHA appraiser who performed the original appraisal, who is currently in good standing on the FHA appraiser roster. The property has not declined in value. The building improvements that contribute value to the property can be observed from the street or a public way. The exterior inspection reveals no deficiencies or other significant changes. The update of appraisal was ordered by the mortgagee and completed by the appraiser prior to the expiration of the initial, change that to the 180-day period. See what I mean, guys? As much as I try to go through every single page, I always leave something that I forgot to correct. The original appraisal report was not previously updated. Electronic appraisal delivery portal. Okay. This is a web-based platform where you or your third-party service providers electronically deliver the appraisal prior to endorsement. So the mortgagees or their designated third-party service providers must deliver appraisals through the EAD portal. And the required documentation: appraisals submitted through the EAD are the appraisal of record for endorsement. And last but not least, reconsideration actions. How they must be documented. Adequate documentation is determined by the type of reconsideration action involved. Number one, a reconsideration of value on existing construction must be supported by evidence of comparable sales. The DE underwriter or appraiser is to document the existing appraisal report, or if necessary, complete the appropriate sections of the new appraisal. Number two, with the reconsideration of the repair requirements, it is the responsibility of the DE underwriter and appraiser to ensure that HUD requirements for existing houses are applied in accordance with guidelines. And number three, other reconsideration actions or changes to the original appraisal may be necessitated by changes in the legal description or boundaries. Rework of the appraisal only required if value is affected, and changes must be documented by the appraiser or DE underwriter. Okay. So we're going to stop here. And then the next section of your training video, we're going to be going through the FHA appraisal. So get your case study number 1 ready. Take care, guys. See you in a minute.